our reasons for existence, create positive change in the world, and influence the direction and changing the status quo of the technical community and large, independent of corporate agenda. We drive our destinies by leading for the sake of good. We are an org, so that's what we're hoping for. As a group, we are best positioned to define optimal approaches to protect citizens, to create positive change, while still having the latitude to nimbly run our businesses. Most people in our meetings and around the table, when we do round tables, are CEOs and leaders in organizations, also investors and people who can actually make the difference. So you'll notice that as we go along. We band together to own our space before bad actors try to exploit it. Well, bad actors are exploiting our space, so here we are. Or potentially thorny public situations arise, inviting perhaps well-intended but likely ill-advised legislative or regulatory involvement. Core members, the membership is open, and it's open for people to apply or people to invite, to be invited. The core members, making sure that we do not infringe on each other's privacy. So when you're in this meeting, if you hear something that you should not share, please do us a favor and don't share. What is discussed and shared in the meeting stays in the meeting. Any publication must be received approval from all members involved. If you create something and other people were participating in creating that, you probably want to share it with them. It's just the normal way of and good behavior, good practice from our perspective. We are not here to disparage or criticize for the sake of doing so. We are here to proactively address a few questions, such as identify core problems, and you'll see through our process that this is what we are after. What are the drivers leading to the current state of things? What can be done to encourage impactful and positive change in all directions? And we will not discuss anything that could be considered antitrust or anti-competitive. We are all from different organizations, different companies, but we're here, we actually present ourselves. And at the same time, we play very careful not to behave in an antitrust or anti-competitive way. Today's agenda, that was the welcome introductions. We'll do introductions. Nicole basically will go through the list, and we'll just do a very quick introduction, if possibly 30 seconds. If you can just say who you are, where you're from, what's your interest in this agenda, in what we are doing. Then we will do a recap of SolarWind, MS Exchange, Colonial Pipeline, etc. And then we'll go into cybersecurity landscape, validation of our assumption. This is our, I think, 6th meeting on cybersecurity, 5th or 6th maybe. We had some meetings in between meetings because of the severity of what's going on out there on cybersecurity. Alex Rayter is going to lead this discussion, starting from the recap all the way to the end. So, yep. Nicole, it's all yours.
Okay, for those of you that I've not met, I'm Nicole Borsian. I am the Director of Competitive Edge Assessments at Multi-Innovation, a strategic IP development company in Novato. I will just quickly go through the list and call on each of you to do your brief introduction. Let's start with Chris.
Good morning, everyone. Chris Clausen. My background is in customer-facing and back-end product development for authentication, identity management, and fraud anomaly detection. And I'm also right now working on some ideas for technologies to enable seniors. So still in the risk space, but also looking at a new frontier here too.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Earl, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Earl Cohen. I'm semi-retired, which means I spend some time doing consulting. I have a background in software and hardware and have done all kinds of high-tech things over the years in many different companies, from startups to big companies. I'm kind of a technical generalist. Most of what I do these days relates to patents and IP And I'm very interested in the issues that are being discussed here, and I'm glad that Shmuel has included me in the company.
Thanks, Earl. Irina.
Good morning. My name is Irina Anisimova, and I am completely unrelated to the IT field. I am a typical end user who is paranoid about security. I'm a CPA. I have lots of client data on my computer, and I'm a solo practitioner. So trust me, IT security wakes me in the middle of the night in panic. So I'm here to hear what people who are actually in the field thinking about it and doing about it and plan to do about it. Thank you.
Perfect. Nice to meet you, Irina. Axel.
Oh, you're on mute, Axel. There he goes.
Okay, so my name is Axel Cloth. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Abacus Semiconductor Company. And everybody who's been involved in a little bit of math or Greek knows the one of the first mathematical instruments to execute some calculations, and that's the abacus. So that's effectively what the focus of my company is, at least the current one. I was prior the founder and CTO of a company called Axiado, and they were focused on security processors to make sure that the hardware exists to protect data that's on your machine.
Great, thank you. Shmuel.
I'm part of it. So Shmuel Silverman, CEO of Multi Innovation, also CEO of Veracity Labs, where we focus on privacy. Privacy and security is a big deal for us, and my interest in general is in this meeting is not only everything that we talk about, which is security, which is top of our mind, but mostly the fact that my intention is to make the difference in the world, and it's not necessarily for us, all of us making money and become very rich, but it's kind of like secure the future of our children and secure the future for our life. I may not look like it, but I'm 59 years old, and I really hope to leave something behind that is more than just being a CEO of a company. So that's my reason for being here. Thanks.
Thank you. Brooks White.
I'm Brooks White. This is Nicole Fallon. We represent Manx Web Solutions. Manx provides all things internet for small businesses, and that's our focus, is the little guy. And to that end, we need to know everything we can to have them protected and all of the people that we support. That's about it.
Great, glad to have you both here. Kirk.
Good morning, everyone. I've been a technologist for about 45 years, back in the days when if you wanted something to run, you had to write your own code. So I used to cut code. Now I'm the pride of ownership. I'm the proud owner of a horizontal IT infrastructure services firm. So I'm kind of right in the crosshairs, and it gets interesting every day. So I do work with Shmuel and Nicole on the projects with Veracity, and I couldn't be any more excited to be involved.
Thanks, Kirk. For those of you that have just joined, we're doing 30-second intros. Robert Jean, would you like to go next? Okay, we'll come back to Robert. Jim?
Yeah, I've been in the technology business for 40 years. Started my career as a software engineer, have spent the last 35 as an investment banker. My interest in this call and my day job is as a cybersecurity focused investment banker, helping companies raise money and execute on M&A strategies.
Great. Stan.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Stan Stahl. I wear two hats. On one hat, I've got a 40-year background in information security, computer security. Started at the MITRE Corporation back in the day. For the last 20 years, I've had first my own company, Citadel Information Group, provided information security management services. A year ago, we sold that to actually a client of ours, a CPA firm, Miller Kaplan. I'm still there as Director of Information Security. And I also have a second hat, which more brings me here, is founder president of an organization called Secure the Village. The idea, it takes a village to secure the village, and which we try to is let's get everybody involved, those with expertise. Let's get together, work together. How do we reach out to the last mile, the end users, from the boardroom to the living room? I mean, everybody needs to know what this stuff's all about. And my passion is connecting the dots to get that information collected and get it out there to people, so that people like you, Irina, know all this stuff becomes automatic for you. You don't have to think about it. It's there.
Great, thank you, Stan. Lisa, would you like to go next?
Sure. I was invited to this from one of my network. I am coming from a background as a strategic growth executive in the C-suite, and I'm currently in the interviewing process. And I've worked with a lot of several security and cybersecurity organizations. And I'm coming to this today looking for best practice, best information, and in order for me to evaluate my next employer. So I am looking at, who's doing what and who's doing it well and who's doing it right.
Great, it's a pleasure to have you. It's a pleasure to have you here. Patrick, I don't think we've heard from you yet.
Good morning. So I have nothing to do with cybersecurity. I am a sales coach. I happen to know Shmuel as well as Kurt. And I was very curious. I have been very curious about all the noise that's going on that surrounds security. When you hear of places like Target and how somebody got in there, and it's just to me it piques my curiosity. So I'm here to learn a little bit more about security and what people are doing about it. And that's the purpose of me being here. And the reason I'm curious about technology is most of my clients tend to be technology clients, whether it's software or hardware or network design, circuits, whatever. So I'm happy to meet everybody, and I'm glad I'm here.
Thanks, Patrick.
You're welcome.
Harlan, is this a good time?
Actually, no, I'm driving a car and I just didn't want to be impolite by not responding whatsoever. So I'm here to listen and learn. Thank you.
Thanks, Harlan. Robert, are you here? Do you want to give it another go? Okay, I don't think we have Robert on. How about last but not least, if I have not missed anyone, would be our presenter, Alex.
Thanks, Nicole. Good still morning, everybody. Alex Rayter. I'm a principal at Phoenix 2.0. We're a full-service IT consulting and management firm. Our focus is day-to-day IT management for companies ranging in size from small to all the way to middle market, and some groups within enterprises, a lot of startups, a lot of not-for-profits. So people that don't have internal IT departments but think technology is important. And our two big focal points are security and transformation projects, which should go hand in hand. And my interest in cybersecurity started, I mean, I've always had it, but it really kind of took front and center stage in 2017 when I realized that our clients were at high risk for being part of a cyber event that could be extremely disruptive to their business. And I took that very seriously. And the more I started to look at what was happening, the more I realized that there's a larger problem here than anybody really realizes, and it's only gotten worse and worse and worse. And here we are in Q1 of 2021, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. And so I'm excited to have some of you here to talk about the topic a little bit more. And I'm going to facilitate the discussion. I'm not going to lead it. So I really would urge all of you to provide input. We have a rubric that we're going to follow that we developed in part, and part of it is something that's come over from other organizations that do ideation, and we're just going to try to flesh out some thoughts and ideas about the state of cybersecurity. And so I just appreciate the opportunity to help facilitate the discussion. So yeah.
Cool, Nicole. If we don't have anybody else to introduce, well, perfect. Alex, you're on.
Okay.
You
Let
can
me
share.
share my screen and then we'll just we'll get rolling here. So let me so our focus today is, let me provide a recap of how we got here. So I think we actually only had 2 meetings on cybersecurity, and they were both on SolarWinds, because we started this group off at the beginning of the year. There was quite a bit of planning that went on last year, and we had our first public meeting in January, if I'm not mistaken, and SolarWinds happened. Now, as you all recall, we've had Equifax and 2 global ransomware, one of which was a kind of a wiperware. There was no ransom being asked for, it just destroyed systems. That one was called NotPetya. And all the way leading to 2021, there's been a rampage, for lack of a better word, of cyber breaches, both public and many private ones that were quietly cleaned up or not cleaned up and swept under the rug. And many companies have gone out of business, some large and small ones. And what happened in January was we had SolarWinds, and we decided to devote 2 meetings to looking at that event, because at the time it seemed almost unprecedented. Not quite. There were other things of supply chain nature. Somebody mentioned Target. There were other things, but it was kind of a wake-up call. And I think we all thought and hoped that that would be a turning point, but yet on the heels of that, we've had the Microsoft Exchange situation, which was a compromise in Microsoft's Exchange mail product, which was a 0-day vulnerability that wasn't known to either Microsoft or anyone else except the bad guys. And that had global ramifications, because there's quite a large footprint or install base of people using Exchange. And then we recently just had Colonial Pipeline 2 weeks ago. And I think you've all probably heard something about it. It had an effect on the gas supply and the gasoline supply for the Northeast. But at the heart of it, it was a cyber event. It was a cyber breach. And so as a group, when we talked about these things, because everybody in the group, and there's people that aren't here today, but who were part of those meetings, who are very knowledgeable on cybersecurity, we actually got pretty far down a path of identifying some root causes and some potential things that could be helpful in fixing the situation. But before we commit to ideating further on those specific solutions, we wanted to kind of trace our steps back and go through a validation methodology to figure out what exactly is the problem and what is the modern definition of cybersecurity. What are the fundamental aspects? Just try to get on the same page so that when we actually go back to ideating, again, we're on the same page, and B, we're not sort of falling prey to the same problem that's happening in the larger universe, which is the breaches keep happening, and there are a lot of very smart people talking about them, but we seem to be having the same conversation and not really making an impact into the problem itself. And so and that's why we wanted to sort of maybe start from the beginning and sort of show our work, for lack of a better term. And I wanted to just let Shmuel or Chris or Nicole or anybody else kind of chime in at this point, and just to make sure I didn't miss anything in explaining kind of how we got here.
Well, with pleasure. Chris, you want to say something, or you want me to jump in?
Go ahead. Good.
Okay, so the process is such that I mean, we spent several meetings talking about cybersecurity, talking about the issues. There were some few brilliant comments associated with what might be or can be the root cause. One was done by Excel that ended up to be the discussion of the month last month, which is the fact that people have been changing software, or software is being sourced from unknown sources, and those unknown sources can easily change that software, such that even when you create an operating system from multiple libraries, you don't really know what you get. And that software can, at that point, have malicious elements within it that impacts you. And Excel kind of like posted as a suggestion to what SolarWinds or what happened with SolarWinds, and obviously it was right, at least to some effect, if not 100%, but that was part of the deal of what we are seeing. And there's more. Now, those great ideas are coming as, brilliant people jumping in, but it's kind of like without the process of looking at the more detail and trying to figure out, have we covered, do we truly understand what's going on? If it is, can we articulate it clearly? And if we can articulate it clearly, can we subdivide it into areas that seems to be independent of one another, but still part of the issue or part of the problem? And can we define the problem well and identify what's the root cause? If we can, through our process, identifying the root cause, we can now start to think about how to solve the problem. And that's kind of like the process we are getting into. We've done it with privacy, and we somehow skipped through the motion with security. And this meeting is basically to do a little bit of recap and make sure that we are all on the same page as we move forward, so we are not missing anything.
Okay, great, yeah. And so in furtherance of that comment, so we have a progression flow that we endeavor to follow for any topic we cover, whether it's security or privacy or AI or whatever else. There's actually a cadre of topics on our website that we hope to cover at some point this year. And it just so happens that cybersecurity and privacy are taking center stage in the universe. So that's kind of where we started. But we want to basically go through what you see here with any topic, which is the presentation of the topic and kind of distilling what's happening. There's usually some incident that's happening in the larger universe that's triggering the discussion. And we want to try to convene people that are familiar with what's happening on any given topic and get like an insider's perspective from the group about what's going on, maybe things that we wouldn't necessarily read in the press, etc. And that's actually what's happened with cybersecurity. And then we will figure out if the topic has legs in that, okay, is this something that we can actually make an impact in? Are we interested as a group on working on it further? And we go and drill down into subsequent steps, which is kind of where we are today, which is we're actively monitoring the situation, and we have some basic fundamentals in place as in the form of a problem statement, basic definitions of things that we agree on. A lot of the language around these topics is sort of new, and it's being used kind of interchangeably. So there's often not a consensus on what privacy even or security really mean in 2021. And then we might go into, which is sort of, again, as far as we actually got this far in security in previous meetings, where we kind of issued an interim advisory. And one of those, as Shmuel mentioned, was, let's stay on this slide for a second, was the situation with the supply chain of software code. Now, Axel happened to mention this in one of our previous meetings, and subsequently, we all found this an intriguing idea that this is part of the root cause, and that was borne out by the facts of the SolarWinds incident. But coincidentally, this idea also made its way into the press because there's other smart people who realize that this is the problem, and there's quite a bit written about it. And so we feel like we're onto something, right? When the general sort of subject matter landscape is validating what we're saying in the group. And so we want to put a tack in that, the software supply chain, and talk about that as a potential topic to drill down into further. But there's other things that we identified, which are the lack of an objective rating system, kind of like a credit score for individuals, but like a score of a similar nature for companies or organizations regarding their cyber posture. Nothing like that exists. There's a whole bunch of compliance frameworks, HIPAA, PCI, FedRAMP, CMMC now, and NIST, and all these things. But different organizations are mapping themselves to different frameworks, and there's no common consensus. And often they're not doing a good job of even mapping to those. So that's part of the problem that we identified. And one of our members, Kirk, who's here, mentioned that there's a fundamental issue at the root level where the whole system is flawed. And so no matter what we're doing, we're just shoveling against the tide. And do we need to rebuild the system fundamentally? And whatever that means, right? Like that seems almost daunting to even try to think about, but it's worth considering because that might be the case. We don't know. And so what we're here today is to just kind of, again, show our work, how we got here, and then think about which of these aspects we want to drill into further. Maybe there's things that we glossed over that are coming to light now in light of Colonial Pipeline that we need to consider and add to the mix. So you can see at some point we're going to get to a situation where we issue a white paper and we have an idea that we have folks here who are investors, or some of them aren't here today, but they're investors and they're people that are founders, and so there's a potential for somebody to take the idea and go to market with it, right? So we're just not there yet. So yeah, have a chat here. Let's see.
Alex, if I may add one more word on your previous slide before we jump. The fact is that some of our members already jumped into solutions. For example, Ben from Bootstrap AI, who is one of our members, he's an investor, and he's now investing in a company that building a solution to basically look for the fingerprint of whoever wrote a piece of software. So try to identify source based on fingerprinting using AI or machine learning as opposed to anything else. It's not by name now, it's by fingerprinting, which he believes could help some of the issues that we are seeing. I'm kind of like still suggesting to all our members to hold their breath and let's go to the process before we jump into any further edging our bets with regard to what to do and how to solve the problem. I'm not sure that I personally have a clear understanding of all the subjects and the different subjects and what they do. And that's why I hope that through this process, we are all being not only educated, but we become better investors and we'll create better solutions.
Okay, so what we want to try to do is encapsulate a problem statement, which is something we haven't done. There seem to be many, right? And so again, based on what we've talked about to date, let's have everybody throw in the chat or raise their hand and comment, but hopefully you can memorialize your comments in the chat in a succinct way so that we can capture those and put them in their appropriate place in the deck, in the rubric. But what do people think is the fundamental problem? Because we don't seem to have agreement on that either in the group or in the wider cybersecurity ecosystem.
Well, I think we have to take into account that, it's pure statistics. If 3% of all people are bad and they are the thieves and they are the ones that don't want to work much, but, reap the benefits of other people's work, then of course you will have thieves burglarizing houses. But today, those that are slightly smarter, they will not burglarize a house. They will break into any infrastructure that is not properly secured, and we make it way too easy for them because there are a lot of companies that very simply have absolutely zero policy on passwords. They don't have a firewall, and they basically let everybody in, right? And so the issue very simply is, it is a human problem, and for as long as people steal, they will always want to find the easiest way to steal the most amount of stuff with the least effort, right? I mean, let's say, I want to break into something and I have a well-secured infrastructure, right? Then I will, of course, look at something that is less well-secured. And I will also look at how many things can I steal at the same time, right? If a bank robber goes ahead and robs a small bank where there's $10,000, well, guess what? He only gets $10,000. But if he uses the same effort to find a bank that is bigger but equally badly secured, he'll get 100,000 or 1 million or 10 million, right? And so that's exactly the same in cybersecurity. Security and cybersecurity in that aspect don't differ. They are exactly the same. It's the least effort and the maximum return of the investment that the criminal, and in this case the cyber criminal, wants to expend for it, right? And for the most part, neither one cares about the risk because they all think they get away with it, right? So that is a huge problem with the entire thing. So, you know, cybersecurity isn't something that is unique to cyber, because it's all about, you know, take out the word cyber and it's security, right? If you don't secure your infrastructure physically or in cyberspace, then you will be a victim of whoever attacks you, because if you make it easy, people will come and people will take away things.
But there's an analogy here, Axel. There's an analogy to personal safety. And let's say my house has a burglar alarm and my neighbor's doesn't, and they get robbed. Well, that's exactly analogous to what you're saying, except society as a whole makes a distinction there and thinks that robbing a house is somehow different from, you know, cyber robbing. And the problem is the penalties for the house robbing and the infrastructure we have to deal with the house robbing are very different. And maybe if we change some of that infrastructure, how we police it, how we deal with it, we greatly discourage it the same way we greatly discourage house robbery.
Earl, so just a quick question for not just for you, but for everybody. So part of the problem is the folks that are doing this are not within US jurisdiction. So while if they were here, we could apply stiff penalties, right? But they're not here. So there seems to be a geopolitical angle here. So
yep, no argument.
So
Before
that's one, but maybe we can take it a little bit bigger and just say that fundamentally, the financial or the finance on the amount of, you know, follow the money, the amount of money we are spending on protecting our, let's say, private data and protect or securing whatever we need to secure from IT perspective is minuscule compared to how much we try to protect against, you know, regular TV.
So one of the pieces here that I see just fundamental, it goes to point one. We as humans have several million years of experience in physical security since we climbed out of the trees, and our ancestors even more. When it comes to protecting our financials in our businesses, double entry bookkeeping is 400, 500, 600 years old. So we've got a lot of experience in how to use that. Cybersecurity, the first papers in it weren't written until the 1970s, and it doesn't make it out of aerospace, Defense Department, and so on, really until the origins of the internet, early 1990s, and so on. So we don't have the broad population don't have the intuitions about cyber that we just naturally have about business, money, and physical security. So going to the unknown unknowns, I think a major part of this problem is just helping people understand just what this cyber thing is all about. They don't get it. Irina, you kind of mentioned this, you know, in your introduction, and we see that all the time with our clients and with friends we have and so on.
I'd like to point out the flip side to Axel's point, and that is we have the human end of the problem. So we can't address this without thinking about what the implementation side is going to be like for that human end of the situation. And our experience with our clients points out that these people they don't have the capacity to protect themselves. We can give them all the information they want. They're still going to create a password that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have to make it easier on that end, or we have to create a solution that doesn't require their input. We're not going to get over the problem of there's a limit to the education that we can provide to the end user. We have to solve the problem before we get to the end user.
Right, I agree. So I think I didn't try to make the statement such that the passwords alone are their problem, right? And I agree, we don't have a good enough system to educate people on the risk, because in general, the education system in the US appears to be lacking, let me put it that way.
and declining.
And declining, right? So it is hard to believe that there is an easy solution for all of this by saying, oh, we'll just educate people more, and then, you know, this kind of stuff has to be done automatically. It has to be done by tools. It doesn't work if everybody has to figure out how how to manage their passwords, because even if they create a good one, I can guarantee you 90% of the people will forget their passwords. I mean, I don't know if you've used PGP, but if you look at the MIT PGP server, about 90% of all passwords have been revoked because very simply, or passphrases there have been revoked, the keys, PGP keys, because people forgot their damn passwords and passphrase to the key, right? So that clearly isn't working because it's not working. But I think there's also another human element, and so that was the shocking revelation about the revelation about the Colonial pipeline was the hackers didn't shut down the pipeline. The CEO of Colonial Pipeline shut the pipeline down because the systems to allow for billing were compromised. So he said, we're not going to ship the oil and the gas for free. He could have just called all of the customers saying, hey, we have a certain flow rate. We know exactly what that is. We can't bill you by the cent for the next week or so, but we'll bill you by ref volume, and then we'll distribute that across whoever received oil and gas from us. Instead, he said, no, I'll shut it down because my billing doesn't work, right? So that was a conscious decision, and that was a ridiculous decision. But
yeah, no, that's a great point, Axel. Yeah, there's an ethics component to this, right? And that's not the only ethics consideration. I'm sure there are others. So yeah, let's jump forward, if we may, to the next slide, and then we can come back to the problem statement. And let's indulge ourselves and talk about, is the existing definition of cybersecurity still adequate? I mean, if you read what the definition is online, you get some version of it's the protection of systems and data from authorized access or destruction, confidentiality, integrity, availability, blah, blah, et cetera. Is that still a valid definition in 2021, or is it lacking something?
Do we want to include disinformation as a piece of what we need to be talking about?
I think, well, that has to do with integrity, right?
Absolutely.
But I think that's a different problem that will be resolved by different mechanisms. As I think about the cybersecurity problem, it's as some have said on this call, it's a people problem, but it's not. It's a software problem. It can be solved with software, and it can be solved by making software more secure from the beginning. The challenge today is that software is being developed and distributed at such a rapid pace, especially with cloud computing, where you have new versions of software being distributed every other week. Inevitably, there will be holes in that can be compromised, and that's not that's a that I think, other than the password issue, which we have to find a way to eliminate. That's the biggest problem that we face, is preventing the weaknesses in software that can be compromised.
Well, I disagree. It's not only software, right? I mean, basically, you can write perfect, well, actually, you can't write perfect software, but even if you could write perfect software, today's CPUs are so complex and the caching mechanisms are so complex that the hardware starts to be part of the problem, right? Processors and stuff, I mean, believe it or not, I've, just for shits and grins to show where the vulnerabilities are, I have attacked systems, hardware, and I've used hardware attacks to get to data, right? So it's more than just the software. It's the hardware is deficient, the software is deficient. There's no doubt about that. Applications are deficient, and the way we deal with authentication is utter bullshit today. It's just not working.
Agreed.
So,
Jim and Excel, I think you're both right, but at the same time, you guys are talking a little bit about what's the problem as opposed to let's define security. If I may kind of like pull you back a little bit, because I need your brain at let's define security for a second.
Do we need to include do we need to call out specifically the human element of this? because like Axel is saying, you can have perfect software, you could even have perfect hardware. Of course, we know none of that's possible, but we have to realize that there's a psychological aspect here. We're talking about cyber attacks that include making phone calls to people and convincing them of things that they don't think are social engineering that they don't realize is untrue. So there's a human element here that's, I think, part of the description of the security definition.
Absolutely. And the vast majority of recent attacks have had a human element to them. And that gets back to passwords. Got to get the human out of the mix and figure out a better way to authenticate somebody is who they say they are.
Right, I agree. And I think the key word here is authentication, right? So if we in fact say, yes, protection of systems and data from unauthorized access, then it says most of what we are trying to convey already, right? Because even if you got the password through social engineering, you're still not really authorized, right? This is not the proper type of authorization. So I think to some degree that definition still sort of holds, not entirely, but I think for the most part, it says what it needs to say. There may be nuances that we're missing at this point in time, but in general, yes, we protect a system from unauthorized access, doing all kinds of things. And that is, in fact, a matter of security, right?
But Axel, so is it worth saying something that so cybersecurity doesn't work unless there's a collective effort, right? And so is that worth noting? Is that like the collective effort to protect systems and data from unauthorized access, or is that a little outside the scope of a pure definition?
Yeah, I wouldn't put that in for the very simple reason that, of course, then you water it down, right? So ultimately what we are, and it goes back to the definition of what's authentication, right? So I always think that authentication is something that you have with something that you only know, right? If you combine those two things, then you're fully authenticated, right? If somebody, chops up my head and takes out the eye, they can overcome an iris scanner. If they chop off my fingers and they use my fingerprint, they can overcome a fingerprint reader. And for that, in fact, you only need 3M tape, right? Now, if they kill me to get to a system, then they won't have access to things only I know, right? So therefore, the combination of something I have and something I know would make for a fairly, robust way of authenticating something, somebody, and some action, right? So again, I think it's the combination of something I have and something I know, right?
That's a piece of it, but there's an ambiguity lurking here that it's, when talking about protection of systems from unauthorized access, there's a recursion. Okay, who gets to decide who's got authorization, and how do you build that recursion, it is, into the whole structure? And I contend that that's one piece of it. A second piece of it is proofs of correctness and the security engineering, and just what are the limits, both theoretical, mathematical limits, but also practical limits of proving security, or how much security do we have to engineer in? Then there's also the question of users getting socially engineered. Some of that DMARC and things like that can help with, but some of it, you got to train the user not to click on, click this link to get your free Amazon gift card. And I don't know that there's any technology that can overcome an ignorant user.
Actually, yes. So I think, Stan, you're absolutely on the right track. So that's why in my blog, I have suggested that, the current way we do things in security is there's an admin and then there's a user. That's not good enough. We need a super admin that administers admins. Then there's an admin, there's a user, and then there's just, I wouldn't quite say the casual user, but that's the end user, right? Mm-hmm. The end user can only do certain things that are basically in the VM that can't escape out of the VM. The user can then, have a little bit more rights and let's say install something, new software, new this, new that, right? And the admin is in fact administering the back end server side, and the super admin now administers admins, right? And so that's today, that's missing. And that's something that I've pushed the FreeBSD Foundation to start to figure out how to implement that into FreeBSD, because clearly the admin and you know, the user paradigm, they don't work anymore today.
Excellent. Do you find that solutions like CyberArk and the other PAM, privileged access management solutions that give timed session-based access and then revoke it for specific, you know, actions to specific people at a specific time, do you think that those move the needle in that regard?
Well, I mean, they're certainly better than nothing, right? So I think anything that helps is a good thing, right? Whether this is already the perfect solution or not, I sort of dispute that. It certainly won't help against attacks that are going against hardware. And, you know, let me give you an example. Intel CPUs, these are relatively well secured if you abstract from Spectre and Meltdown. But, you know, the older servers all had an MMU in it that allowed you to DMA data from A to B without checking if there was any kind of a restriction on the memory areas that you were allowed to access or not. So if you couldn't use the CPU software and the operating system to copy it, just tell the DMA controller to copy the really confidential shit into an area that you have access to, and that was it. You could do it, and you still actually can, right? So the older Xeons that are not exactly the newest versions, they still allow you to do that. So they're completely ignoring any kind of security tags, right? So we have to figure out a way to do much, much better in hardware. We have to do much, much better in the software realm. And then we have to do much better in the administrative realm to show and allow people certain things and disallow others, right? I think that's really what needs to happen. And as I said, I've already talked to the FreeBSD Foundation to figure out if there's a way to make sure that there's more than just, you know, root or admin and user, right?
So let me take us to something else that I think will be helpful. So I think part of the problem is as well is that we found this very helpful in the privacy discussion, is looking at the various stakeholders in the ecosystem of the problem that we're discussing and looking at what their various motivations are and what they bring to the table. And this is the other part of trying to flesh out and get our hands around the topic and the moving parts. So if we talk about the stakeholders involved in cybersecurity or data security, et cetera, who are those people? And I put some examples here, but I don't know that these are final or correct. I mean, let's see if we can get some consensus around who the stakeholders are. And are we missing any large group of constituents that would be considered stakeholders based on either interest or influence or some other connection to cybersecurity?
Yeah, I'd say law enforcement, Alex, needs to get added to the list.
Yes, I would agree.
The government people like at NIST and US CERT and
how do you differentiate those folks stand from the regulators? I mean, because your NIST is, you know, sort of a public-private, I mean, it's the National Institute of Science and Technology, so maybe not a good example. They're a .gov entity, right?
Yeah, I see regulators are more like the FDIC, FFIEC people, the PCI, DSS folks, the people who actually implement HIP, who make sure HIPAA is properly implemented. Those more regulators, but the NIST, US CERT, the Cyber Readiness Institute are all in their own ways, their own elements of the stakeholder process, because they carry a lot of the institutional knowledge base and are connected like Cyber Readiness Institute. And how do we get it out into the broader community that way? So
and CISA would be part of that cohort, right? Not, yeah. What about folks like MITRE and the SANS Institute and you know, I mean, are they part of this group as well?
Yeah, they should be part of that group because they're not federal regulators, but they have taken on some of the roles of it. So I think, you know, they should be included in that.
Okay. Any other group of constituents?
Alex, I think this is very broad. It's also kind of like complex list. When I mean complex list, that there are conflict interests between parties on the list. For example, when I think about cybersecurity, I think about first and foremost is what there is to lose. What are we losing? So if somebody hacked into my heart, because I've got a device that runs my heart, somebody hacked into it, what I have to lose is my life. So will I want to prevent anyone ever, under no circumstances, getting into my device that runs my heart? If I'm a bank, what do I have to lose? If I'm a government institute, what do I have to lose? If I am the village and somebody hacked into my water supply and contaminate them or change the chemical compounds within my water, what do I have to lose? I would think about it as there are a list of people here, but they're all kind of like representing different level of risk and focus associated with us and associate with the security. So I'm kind of like thinking about what is to lose first, as before I even define those stakeholders. What are the things that we really want to protect?
Well, I mean, I think that part of this is what are the various motivations, right? And impact.
Yes, motivations. Thank you.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
I think, yeah, I think that'll come out as we, as we look at this. So for example, let's take our clients, right? I mean, what are their beliefs, motivations, and resources? Somebody said military, but I mean, would that not be part of the government?
Yeah.
Or yeah, actually, I don't know that I even have government on here in a kind of clearly delineated way.
Right. That's the issue. I mean, the military, we all know, is deeply involved in cyber defense, and they got to be listed in some fashion.
Yeah. Also, educational institutions, Alex, needs to go on this as a stakeholder. They're doing a lot of training, and whether it's public education like community colleges or stuff that like CompTIA is doing.
And you know, some of the funny stuff here that I see is when we say government, military, etc., they also have a lot of interest for to be able to enter all other systems, including their citizens, you know, under their protection in order to protect them. But at the same time, when you have this type of interest, it's a conflict of interest because it doesn't work both ways. You're either open or closed. And if you're closed, you're super closed.
Yeah. Well, and as I'm looking at this list, I'm also seeing kind of a system emerging. These are some of the nodes or the agents in the system. Do we want to include as a stakeholder the cyber criminals?
Oh yeah,
because they're playing in the other direction.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm missing an obvious one. I'm not sure how that happened, but yeah, the stakeholder that's driving this whole conversation, probably, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think they're almost as institutionalized as today's military or governments, the way they work, the way they operate, the tools that they're using, and everything else. So this is, I mean, yeah, they're the one of the biggest player on this list.
So let's go through this. I mean, it's worth kind of like going through the steps. What are the beliefs of our clients? What do our clients believe in regards to cybersecurity? I don't mean, you know, other considerations, but they believe they deserve a discount for, but aside from
they believe if they hire you, then they are protected and don't need to worry about cybersecurity anymore.
That's a really good point. I mean, I think they do to a large extent think that. Okay.
So I was kind of thinking the same thing, Irina, like, are they overly optimistic about the problem? And like, are they kind of a little too early?
They outsource it to the IT specialists because your clients at least understand what's going on. Several lines down are your clients' clients, who are users and private citizens. They are interacting with your clients. The thought of cybersecurity doesn't even enter their minds because they're not dealing with cybersecurity per se. They are providing information to your clients, providing all sorts of stuff that can be stolen and used against them and against your clients.
And that's the user private citizen, right? I mean, because if it's another
Yes.
business, they're also, operating from the same beliefs that our clients are. But if it's a user private citizen, their belief maybe is, overly optimistic, as Chris put it, or not my problem.
Alex, I don't think they even have any belief here. They just assume that if they are interacting with someone who is supposed to have security, that they are secure. So they will send you a W-2 without even a password attached to an email. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, but how do we encapsulate that into a statement? So is that shirking of responsibility or false belief in it's someone else's problem, or what?
Yes, the false belief in someone else's problem.
Yeah, they think it's taken care of.
And also, yes, and also statistically, since they didn't get hurt themselves yet, they think it's not going to happen to them.
Right, right.
It's a psychological of, well, it didn't happen to me. Probably all is well. Probably they don't care for me. I'm too small for them to care about, etc., etc.
So I'm wondering too, going back to the first one, our clients and beliefs, how much do we think at issue is people, firms want to spend the bare minimum, that they don't necessarily invest big or think as big as they need to in this space versus titrating out funding?
This is about the inadequacy of means as compared to threats, because your clients are in business of selling other services. And at some point, the IT, the security can become either overly expensive or overly difficult to maintain and handle. And because that's not their core business, they will always try to look for something cheaper.
Well, exactly. I mean, what I've seen, both in my corporate life and in talking to others, is I call it the one black eye model, right? So you don't get the funding up front, and then something pretty bad has to happen. And then all of a sudden it's an urgent sense of urgency and there's funding, but then that sometimes dries up as soon as people feel like the crisis is averted.
Are we still talking about our clients?
I'm talking about clients. I'm talking about big companies, to Irina's point, though, they're kind of balancing that this isn't, they're not in business to be secure. They're in business to do whatever they are, whatever their core product is or service. And it's kind of a necessary means to their business, but don't necessarily invest the way they need to, or maybe think ahead is the way they might.
Well, some have the money to invest where they can invest, and that will be the point of educating their management. If they're big enough to produce big enough incomes for stakeholders and CEOs and everything else. So don't pay your CEO 10 million bonus, use some of this money on cybersecurity. But the point here is the smaller companies are at big disadvantage because there is very little recourse in case something happens to a smaller company. And they may or may not have enough means to protect their data, their business, by paying, as much for security as bigger companies have to.
Well, I'm not sure if I would make a distinction between small and big companies. I mean, I've seen incredible.
I think we need to distinguish between. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was saying, I think we need to distinguish between enterprises and folks like Colonial Pipeline, which is a private company of all things, but is providing a critical service. So there's smaller clients, but there's enterprises, whether it's Google, Facebook, Twitter, Colonial Pipeline, that are providing a good or service that has become critical to day-to-day life. So I think they're in a class of their own, it seems. but what do we call those? I mean, they're not just enterprises. They're, you know, key goods or services. Is that maybe?
No, it's critical infrastructure. I mean, literally everything, you know, even your telecommunication service is critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
The way you get your water, the way you get your gas, right? That's all critical infrastructure. And so that's why they should act differently, despite the fact that some of them are private. You know, railroads are part of it too. And, you know, believe it or not, airports. And believe me, there are plenty of morons running those, and they have no clue what the hell they are doing.
Okay. Okay, interesting. What about InfoSec vendors? What are their beliefs?
Oh,
before you guys skip forward, I think we need to include the flip side on the client side. Yes, there's a huge percentage that are overly optimistic and think things are going to be done. I think there's another percentage that we need to keep in mind, and that is the people who are terrified and know that they're vulnerable, and feel like there's almost nothing they can do, and that's why they give all their chips over to someone else to take care of the problem. So I think having that, knowing that there's a different perception that leads almost to the same place is important.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, to some degree, yes. But, you know, one thing I want to throw in here is basically the InfoSec vendors are part of the worst part of the problem, because ultimately, if you look at it, software has been unable to protect us, and, you know, they're proposing to use more software, improving their financial outcome, but at the same time, increasing the attack surface, right? And I've been criticizing that forever, because ultimately, software has a much larger attack surface than hardware. It's much easier to penetrate a system that is believed to be secured by more software. The more software there is, the easier I have it to get in there.
Oh, yeah, that's yeah.
Right. And I mean, for people who don't understand it, you know, I always have the analogy of the house, right? The structure of the house has never been breached. All of the burglaries have gone through the windows and the doors. And the InfoSec vendors insist on adding more windows and doors to make it more secure, which is utterly and completely clinically insane.
They also,
I mean, go ahead, Stan, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, they do one other thing. They give the belief to the buyer, oh, use my software, use my solution, and now you're secure. And we know that isn't the case. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, if somebody, XDR is now the big thing, hot new thing, right? I mean, it's like we haven't even, it's like a bolt-on to SIM and everything else, right? So XDR is extended detection and response. A lot of companies aren't even doing the basic managed detection and response or security incident management, right? Logging and, you know, patching and basic stuff like that. And so now we're going to come up with this other overarching thing that's going to be a lot more complicated to implement. I wonder, do people that are ideating around XDR products, when they first thought about it, did they really think to themselves, yes, this is really going to move the needle in terms of cybersecurity, or is it, you know, there's a place for it in the market and we can make some money? I mean, you know, to be cynical.
The latter one is absolutely correct. I mean, basically, just for shits and grins at Axiato, we ran a net scan on all of our neighbors, IP neighbors, right? And in the old days, we had TCP and UDP, and we used different ports for different things. Today, everything is done through HTTPS port 80, which now makes everything else more complicated, because now all of the different services go through HTTPS, and all of the others are either completely ignored, in which case, for the most part, the firewalls are left open on all of those ports. Yeah, it is absolutely ridiculous, but that's the way it is.
Yeah.
So Alex, and this may be the wrong time to introduce it, but I've been holding it as, it's probably more of a cause, but I mean, we're talking about it right now, is the whole detection and surveillance space as being a piece of this, right? To use Earl's analogy about my house is secured, my neighbor's isn't, my neighbor got broken into, there's not a lag. Earl would find out within hours, if not a day, that there was a problem in his neighborhood, right? And then he may want to take reinforcements or even check to make sure that even though his alarm didn't go off, his house hasn't been tampered with. the lag time that we're seeing on these exploits is incomprehensible, right? And so we can have bulletproof layered security, which we all know will never quite get to bulletproof. But right now, it's months before people find out there's an issue, and it has to be some huge gesture to let people know they have a problem.
Okay, so you're talking about,
yeah, I don't know if it's here, or you could say like maybe it's the InfoSec vendors are not spending enough time on detection and surveillance. Maybe it's all about perimeter defenses or whatever they are, without saying, you know what, we're also going to have a checks and balances to say there are going to be issues with our flagship products, and we better have ways of being aware of that. So I don't know if it can be framed in what we're talking about here, but
I know what you're saying. I mean, it's the kind of guidance that came out after Exchange, right? They said, hey, go back and look for these malware variants in your environment, or SolarWinds, in both cases, obviously advisory, and then do the cleanup, right? So, but why do we wait until the incident to do that kind of deep sort of house cleaning or scanning?
Well, you and I had a chat yesterday around Colonial. It's like, how many more things could be embedded, like kind of landmines in other infrastructure right now that we could see bear fruit with what's already been deployed.
I would like to add to that something that Axel pointed out at the very beginning. I think the first discussion, and carried on that discussion with Shmuel. And the 2 points that meant the most to me is that down to the chip level, we've got no security. Every chip on the planet is insecure. So we have to rebuild the house from the chip level up. We are required. It's mandatory. It's not an option. So anybody trying to do XDR or anything, they're just blowing into the wind. So the point is that we can discuss about the past all we want. It, to me, and I hate to say this because I'm kind of black and white on this, it's superfluous. I don't care about the past. I just don't care. We know that it's fundamentally unusable. And so we as a group set the bar for the future, knowing that it will get compromised in the future. But to Irina's point, we are on the high ground. Once we rebuild the house, now they're in reaction mode. They will barnstorm the door. But the most important point that Shmuel made to me, and I will never forget this, is that you will never get past the human. There's always we could write and rewrite the fundamental, the most secure system, nobody can crack it. But the human element will never be fixed. And therefore, it'll always be cracked because somebody's going to get to somebody. And that is fundamental to the whole process. That doesn't mean we sit on our asses and let this thing continue on the way it is. It's a shame. It's a sham. We're not leaving this for our children. We are not.
Well,
and that's,
and
that's how I feel about it. So the sooner we get on with determining how are we going to fix this from the chip level up and make it as difficult as possible, that's where we get traction. And maybe that's a statement document, and who knows. But
we're getting to the purpose statement of what is our purpose here. Is it, I think we already said early on, total security is not our purpose. And one of the reasons is that there's some level of risk that's acceptable to some of the people some of the time, right? So we don't, so yeah, we're not going for total security. So maybe some form of the human element is okay. Maybe some chipsets that are not as secure for certain use cases are okay. So how do we, when we get to the purpose statement, I think we need to flesh that out like the way we do the problem statement and definition, and just agree on it, but also figure out where's the minimum, the bar that we want to meet with security, I think.
Well, I still am stuck in the fact that in the analogy to the house concept, I don't want to force everybody to build a concrete bunker with no windows in order to be secure, because that's not any way to live, right? So the question is, how do we develop the right mindsets and overall infrastructure? And I think we raised some of those points already about systems that police themselves, that can, raise alarms when they think something is wrong, analogous to, your motion detector in your house going off when you're not at home. it seems like that's got to be part of the solution too, of just changing how this stuff is detected, reported, and dealt with, and also policed. And yes, it's got to be international policing just to, discourage it, just the way any other crime is discouraged.
I agree. And so that's why I said the house analogy is only valid to a point, right? Because certainly it doesn't make sense to have a house that has no windows and doors. You can't get in, even you can't get in, right? So there have to be doors and windows, there's no doubt about that. But the question is, how many of them and how do we secure the doors and the windows? And today, the doors and windows are not secured at all. And more importantly, the solution appears to be, let's add more doors and windows. And that's, that certainly isn't working the way that people want. It may make some people money, which is one motivator, but of course, it doesn't solve the problem as is.
Okay, back to the problem statement. What is the problem? Is the problem that people are being extorted for money by their data being held hostage against their will? Is that kind of the lowest common denominator? Or is the problem that, that identity theft happens, or that, our Bitcoins get stolen out of our crypto wallet? Like what exactly is, the thing where this becomes, like people consciously smoke cigarettes, right? In this day and age, people know the harms of tobacco. There are people, tobacco's legal, right? And so people are free to make a choice and say, look, I'm going to, given all the risks, continue to smoke cigarettes, right? Or use tobacco. So on the spectrum of security and data governance and, or being informed citizens, where is that line where people fundamentally have a problem with cybercrime?
Well, I think you have to make a differentiation between what affects you and what affects you and others or critical infrastructure, right? So, and coming back to your analogy, if somebody wants to smoke, well, I mean, I don't care if they want to kill themselves, but they're not allowed to do that in my vicinity where I may have, some of the smoke come towards me. But it becomes a very different game once you have critical infrastructure involved, right? Once critical infrastructure is involved, there must be something that says this has to be secured to a different level, right? And you don't have the option of not securing it.
So, okay, so then it's not protection of systems and data from unauthorized access and corruption for the sake of protection of systems and data. It's protection of this stuff in furtherance of there not being a detriment to the common good, right? Or
correct.
So maybe that's a part of the definition that needs to be retooled is your neglect or somebody else's exploitation of data and systems when it causes harm to other people.
I think security, we need to define security as we have, right? But there have to be different levels of security, and there has to be the leeway for an individual to make a decision not to be secured. That's fine. I mean, if they want to do that, that's fine. They should have the option to not secure their stuff at all. The same way that it's legal to not have a door lock in your door in your house, right? If that's what they choose to do, that's fine. But if in fact you are running a show where you are basically providing critical services to others, then you should not have that leeway. That level of security must be such that, a more than average qualified attacker should not be able to bring critical infrastructure down.
That's the same exact analogy that, why the security in your house where you may have a burglar alarm isn't as strong as the security around a power plant, which has a big fence with barbed wire and guards patrolling it.
Exactly.
And isn't it also the case in the private sector? So there's critical infrastructure, and I think we the people have the right to say critical infrastructure, you got to do A, B, C, D, and E up to a certain level. We would expect the NSA, CIA, and all to do even more. And when it comes to non-critical organizations, law firms, e-commerce sites and so on, don't we have to give them not security as 0-1, you either do it or you don't, but here's a spectrum of things you should do, might do, should want to do, and up to a certain level, you decide it's your business. If you decide wrong, you go out of business.
I think it's a little bit more complex than that.
I agree, but I still think the question's valid. Go ahead.
Ultimately, Google is private, right? But at the same time, quite a bit of critical infrastructure relies on them. So I'm pretty certain that the Department of Defense, the email system of the DoD is run on Google Cloud, right?
Mm-hmm. Either on Google or Amazon. I mean, one of those. So
now Amazon was supposed to take Jetty, so that's different. But
yeah, well, I mean, the Amazon AWS's government cloud has like 14 agencies or so on it. So yeah, I mean, it's but so what are you saying, Axel? What about it?
What I'm saying is that critical infrastructure can be public and can be private, can be privately owned, right? Mm-hmm. For as long as critical infrastructure is provided, and by this point in time, Google and AWS and Azure are part of the critical infrastructure. They have to do more to protect not only their own infrastructure, but also all of their tenants, because not all tenants know what the hell they are doing.
Right.
But that point can be extended to, quite a large variety of private entities. Anybody that, is in e-commerce and collects credit card information, anybody in healthcare that collects healthcare PII, those things also need to maintain a very high level of security, because getting breached can create a tremendous amount of damage and to a wide range of people. If you take it, to its sort of logical extreme, if you own a gun, you should have to have a lock on your house, because if somebody breaks in and gets your gun, they can do a lot of damage. So where does one draw the line at, the most ironclad security level versus, live and let live, and you're a private citizen and you don't have to have a lock on your house?
Well, to some degree, you're right. But what I'm saying is, and I don't know if you were present in prior meetings, but basically what I've been advocating for is to never ever give out credit cards, but a hash of the credit card to verify that in fact it's correct, right? Same for social security numbers. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever to compare a social security number with another social, or with what you have. So therefore, sending SSNs and sending account info and sending credit card numbers doesn't make any sense whatsoever, right? Make sure there's an agreed upon protocol so that you can get away with sending a hash of your credit card number, a hash of the social security number, right? That's good enough. You don't need the SSN. Actually, the SSN should be vastly longer than it is. So that's, of course, a problem by itself. But it doesn't make any sense to disclose anything that doesn't have to be disclosed, right? We can be much, much smarter about it. And by doing that, we don't need to send anything over an unsecured link that would contribute to something being stolen by somebody just monitoring it.
Yeah, I agree, but whether you're talking about data in motion or data at rest, there are still tremendous number of systems that have that information.
I agree, and that's not a good thing.
I agree, but where do you draw the line is my question. So given that it is out there, and it's going to be very, very difficult to change it in the near future, that means you have to secure it. And so that comes back to, where do we draw the line as to the level of security necessary for people who have that information?
So we have 5 minutes, 6 minutes left, and I wanted to hand the floor back over to Shmuel and Nicole. As I think this is fascinating that we're talking about some pretty fundamental things to security, and we have a wide spectrum of opinions, all of which are valid to a large degree. So not sure where that leaves us, but I think it's proving out that this kind of exercise is worthwhile. And I think we'd like to continue this. How exactly we do that and under what format, we probably need to think about it, because it sounds like it'll be time intensive to really fill a lot of this data out this way. So
I'm sorry to interject, as was just pointed out, I've not been on previous calls. I am curious as to what the ultimate objective is of this group. Is it to, define a new set of cybersecurity standards for, to be implemented and adopted nationally, or is it an advisory committee to some organization? What are we trying to accomplish? What's the end objective here?
Well,
other than to have some very, very fascinating conversations, which these are.
Robert, I don't know if you can see. I'm not sure who was talking, Jim or Robert, but I don't know if you can see the slide.
I can.
Okay. So that's kind of the progression flow that we have in mind for any given topic that we tackle. One of the things that when we were thinking about this group, Chris was part of a group like this in another life that consisted of kind of a conglomerate of corporations and people within corporations, pretty highly placed, and they ended up ideating around something and then bringing it to market. So it's not entirely impossible that we'll do that. I think that's well within kind of the realm of possibilities, but there's kind of a chasm between where we are today and getting there. So,
Jim, I'm already aware of at least 3 different initiatives that resulted, and some in conjunction to what we are doing, and some directly from what we are doing by seeing the breadth of the problem. Some of our members are jumping into conclusions and are going and doing things. But beyond that, there are also great ideas, and one of them by Alex, who is the presenter today, to basically provide some way of measurements, or provide something out there that will tell people by organization how well they're doing, and at the high level. So if I want to go and interact with an organization, I would like to know what is their level of security being assessed by a completely independent measurement, by maybe a .org that does it, and by doing so, I'll make a more informed decision. Alex came with this thing. He says it's necessarily, we don't see it really out there. But again, these are kind of like some solution to a problem, and I'm still in the process, and I'm sorry that I'm delaying all of us by doing that. I don't think I'm completely naive as a person based on my background and success in life, but I'm still kind of like puzzled with regard to what are the set of solutions we need to go after. And Jim, I would love us and encourage every member to go after a set of solutions that will help us solve this problem. That's our intentions, is actually encourage real tangible solutions that will enable all of us to live our life better.
Got it. Thanks. That was helpful.
Cool. So we do plan to get to conclusions, and we do plan to point out possible solutions. And at that point, we do plan to help members to find the funding and connect with the right people and do everything possible to make it happen.
Could I ask that folks send their notes, either put them in chat or send them over to us after the meeting, because we will compile them and put them in kind of the appropriate places and use that as a platform for the next meeting where we pick things up.
Perfect. And guys, I think this was a fantastic meeting. I'm so happy about it. And I do feel that we are kind of like in the middle and we have to stop because of time. And I just have to respect everybody's time here. We're all very busy and have other meetings and other responsibilities. My humble suggestion is maybe we will delay. I mean, next month we were supposed to do privacy meeting. Let's continue this security and let's see if we can continue with this approach and find a better definition to what is the security that we are going after, and that will help us solve, or what are the problems as resolved and how we're going to solve them, so we can meet the definition appropriately. That's my humble recommendation, but I don't know, we'll take it offline, and myself and Alex and Chris will hash it out, and we'll talk about the agenda for our next meeting. But we are definitely here in the middle, and there's some work that we need to do, and then continue. Okay. Can I say thank you to Alex? Alex, thank you. This was awesome. Thank you for leading us. And
Thank you, guys. Yeah.
continue.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
By the way,
everybody.
if anyone thinks we should not continue this discussion, please say so now or shoot me an email about it. Okay.
Sean, can I ask Sean a question? Is he
Yeah.
around? I wonder when Sean, when startups like the one that you introduced me to that's doing the new EDR, XDRs, did they go through this kind of ideation and sort of concept proofing?
Honestly, I really don't think so. So a little bit more background about them. The current CEO was an investor. And then from my understanding, he just bought out the technology. His background's not in that space. So I really don't know what the engineers went through in the ideation phase to create it. But from my understanding, when I did talk to the lead engineer was, this started back in 2014. What they designed was they were thinking of, what the next step in the future would be with multiple endpoints. But everything that went over today, I did start late, so I didn't get all of it. I don't think so. I don't. Yeah, I can't tell you for sure, but I don't think so.
I don't mean to pick on them either. I just mean in general, like the startups that you've talked to.
Wow. Well, Alex,
today was such a high overview that I can't really see anyone when they're building a product really think that big of a picture. I don't know.
Well, Alex, I can tell you, I get clients coming again and again after spending years building stuff, and then spending most of the time doing competitive edge assessment with me, because they don't really yet understand what they bring to the table and why. And specifically with that company that you're talking about, I did finish a competitive edge assessment there. Actually, I think, to my mind, awesome. They have a set of values that they bring to the table that are fantastic. And that's why I spoke with Sean and say, we need to run it by you so you can give us some more feedback from your perspective.
Yeah.
Gotcha. We did a lot of prior thinking at Axiato before, creating the company and the product. So yes, we thought through a whole bunch of things before we actually even presented it to the military.
Yeah,
I thought you did
spent years about it before presenting it to military, and then years, a few years working on it before even Axiato started.
Well, but you can tell from that, actually, like in your case and other cases, you can tell from what the company is endeavoring to do, that they would have had to have some very deep level of analysis of the marketplace and the science behind the product and all of that. But I think there's just a lot of stuff out there where I think people just kind of have a good idea and they see that there's a market need for it, and that's really the driver. So, and then we have things that are in the market that make money but don't really move the needle in terms of solving an issue, right? So, well, this is great. Yeah. I hope we didn't bore people with the level of detail. But
Well, I can just say thank you for everyone participating. I think all of you brought lots of valuable input, and we should continue. I'm looking forward to see and meet all of you next time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, bye.
Thank you for having us.
Irina, I'll follow up with you
Pleasure,
separately.
Pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.